advisor for Advice Line here at Scottish Autism. This lunchtime, I'm joined by two advisors from the team, Caitlin and Kirsten. Thank you both for taking the time out of your day today to join me for this Advice Line Live event. As always, our Advice Line Live event today is to answer any questions viewers may have, and the three of us are on hand to offer any autism-specific advice, support or guidance. So please feel free to post your questions into the comments below, and I will do my utmost best to keep an eye on these. I guess whilst we wait for some of the questions to come in, Kirsten and Caitlin, we do have some pre-submitted questions as well, but what we'll do is we'll talk about, I guess, the festive period, as it is our last Advice Line Q&A for the year. And I guess, you know, the three of us have been talking about the festive period along with the wider team and talking about how it can be such a special time for the year, for people. But for some people, it can be quite daunting. It can be unpredictable. And I guess that's due to changes in daily structure, routine, and I guess those increased social events that take place over the festive period. Kirsten, I guess my question to you is, what advice might you give to parents at this time of year in the run-up to Christmas, particularly as schools start to wind down for the festive period? What can parents expect from the schools, or what can they plan for?
Thanks, Sophia. Yeah, I come from an education background, so I was a support for learning teacher in my past life. So I do notice lots of changes in school. A lot of our young people who are neurodivergent become dysregulated around about holidays. It's that anticipation of change, particularly around Christmas. There are so many things happening in school. So, you know, it starts very early usually, with things like school plays and nativity rehearsals. So, you know, our young people are out of class, they're working with other staff, working with other children. Usually it's sort of primary 1 to 3 that come together for a nativity. So you've got all of those different things. So speaking to staff in school about what is changing, what is your timetable, how is that being affected, so that you can have, you know, the night before spend with your child, what's going on tomorrow. Let's have a look at some of the good things that are going to be happening, because there are lots of good things. Let's have a look at the challenges, and let's think about what would maybe help. You know, something like using visuals in school, using visual at home as well, thinking about ear defenders, noise cancelling earbuds, things like that, if they're with lots of other children, in quite often rehearsals are in a big gym hall, things like that, so that can be quite challenging. Focusing on what is staying the same as well, sort of letting them know that it's a temporary thing, it's not going to be forever as well. Mm-hmm. So we'll come up to Christmas and then we will pass that, so it's not going to be happening all the time. Things like, you know, using photos, pictures, symbols, writing things down as well. I was always a great fan of a whiteboard. Every child loves a whiteboard and whiteboard pens. So having something like that for your child at home can be really, really helpful as well. Everything changes in the school, so your PE suddenly becomes social dancing, so that brings along with it another whole range of sensory needs as well, thinking about holding hands with other children, loud music. It really does change. And then you've got the pantos and the shows that you go out to as a whole school. Sometimes it can be about sort of preparing young people by showing them videos of what might happen, talking about audience participation, making sure they've got a get out of, you know, get out as in sort of leave the theatre or something like that, sort of sitting in the back and the end of the row and things like that. Then you've got the famous Christmas lunches as well, and there's music in the lunch hall all of a sudden, and everything's decorated, so it can be really sensory overload. So trying to keep things as normal as possible and letting them know that these things will go back to normal again. On top of that, you've got Christmas parties, so then you've got to think about sort of winning and losing, and that dreadful pass the parcel and being disappointed at not getting things. So all sort of preparation around things like that, I think, is really important as well.
Definitely, and you raise some interesting points. Actually, yes, schools are winding down, but there's an awful lot of change at this time of year in terms of what children and young people are doing day to day during this kind of school time. And I guess it is considering how parents can best support their child alongside obviously the school being involved in that as well to support those changes. So thank you, Kirsten. I think that gave a really kind of broad overview for people of things to consider. But I guess if people do have, particular questions around the festive period that they maybe want to ask today, or even if you want to contact our advice line for us to kind of offer some kind of personalized support, advice and guidance in relation to the kind of impending changes, shall we say, up until the run up to the festive period, then, please get in touch. And Caitlin, I guess I'm going to come to you now in terms of the festive period. And I guess, as a team, we have spoken about how, the festive period can look different for everyone. And I guess from your perspective, what would be some of the top tips or things everyone should be considering during the festive period to ensure that it's enjoyable for everyone, but whilst it also promotes, I guess, self-care and well-being for everybody at the same time?
Yeah, definitely what Kirsten's saying about young people and school children is obviously very relevant at this time, but there's not just young people that struggle in the festive period, so it's important to acknowledge that. I think the main thing to do is to actually allow time for that decompression and that relaxation in between these events that do come around Christmas, and planning that into your schedule and doing just that planning is so important to allow for a more relaxed Christmas. And it sounds like, oh, that could be quite regimented, but actually the plan is what could make it more relaxed for some people, having that established routine. Yes, it's a different routine from the norm, but establishing a new routine throughout the festive period is really important for everyone. I think whether you're autistic or supporting an autistic loved one, or just anyone in general could do with that kind of self-support. And there's a lot of expectations around Christmas and socializing with others, and it's about knowing your limitations with that as well. It's about actually how much can you commit to, how much energy do you have to put out in that festive period. It's not a long time, and everyone tries to squash a lot into that very short period of time, and it's just about that kind of self-awareness, or being aware of the people you support and how much are they going to be able to manage in that short amount of time, and allowing the recovery time for what they are doing. And there's other aspects of Christmas, not just socializing, so things like Christmas decorations that can be dysregulating, and it's out of routine and it's a change. If you can do things like that gradually, putting them up gradually, taking them down gradually as well, because we can get quite attached to the loveliness of Christmas and all our decorations as well. So it's about that also. And then the expectations around gift giving and gift receiving can really be quite distressing to a lot of people, whether it's not knowing how to react to gifts or reacting unexpectedly. It's explaining that to other people, that yes, I appreciate that gift, I might not show it, but I might come back to you in a few days with how much I've appreciated it. Or if it's a younger person, explain that to other adults in their life, that they might not show their appreciation in the same way, or they might do it in a bigger way than a typical person would. And the same with giving gifts. It's about managing your expectations around that and making sure you're supporting yourself in these activities that are out with the norm and have unexpected outcomes sometimes as well. So there is a lot to take into account, but the main thing is looking after your well-being and making it work for you. It can be about you, and that little bit of self-care needs to come in as well. It is a time of giving and a time of being together, but you have to look after yourself to make sure that you can be present in an enjoyable way.
Yeah. And I think it's quite easy for all of us to get swept up by the festive period and the Christmas festivities. And it's quite easy for us to forget about ourselves and looking after ourselves in those moments. And like you say, it's thinking about and making a plan for yourself in terms of how you're going to look after yourself in that during that time. And what works for you as well. Actually, what works for one person may not work for another, and it's important to consider, well, what works for me, and how do I look after myself at a time where you do, there is that feeling of expectation of giving. So yeah, thank you, Caitlin. And I guess that brings us into one of our first kind of pre-submitted questions. And it's from a parent, and they said that their child is really excited about a Christmas party that they've been invited to. As a parent, what they're wondering is what can they do to help it to be a positive and enjoyable event for their child? And Caitlin, I guess it leads quite nicely onto some of the bits that you've spoken about there. And I just wonder, what could this person be thinking about?
Yeah, I think it's important to note firstly that it's really good that the child is excited and wanting to engage in that way, because we can see a lot that expectation and that kind of anxiety around having to, but this child is expressing that they want to and they're excited about it. And it's good to kind of support this child in a way that they're not going to lose that excitement for future events. So if we can prepare them in the best way to set them up going forward and actually have the best outcome of this, and it can be around things like, do we do a little bit more planning? If it's a school party, can you engage with the school a bit, get more details around the ins and outs of it rather than just the start time? Is there more you can get in that way? Or if it's a family or friends party, that'll be a lot easier to navigate. You can talk to your loved ones about what the party is going to entail and prepare your child for all of that. Is there a role that the child can take on in the party that gives them a kind of focus and an outlet, that even if it's helping with the food, helping with games involved in the party, do they want to be involved with games? Is that something they want to sit out of? Is it about being at the party and just observing, or are they really excited about engaging in every activity? It's about finding out those little parts of it and making sure that everything is in place to support that child to enjoy the party in the way they want to, because there's so much that goes into it, and it's not just as simple as showing up for an autistic child. Sometimes it's about that little bit more planning and that little bit more support around that to make sure that that experience is enjoyable and it doesn't affect any future experiences with a negative impact on the child at that time.
And you're right, it is a bit about that pre-planning for your child, and there's nothing wrong in asking what the plans might be for a party. Usually there are some rough form of plan for a party to go ahead. So there is no harm in asking about that, and then obviously thinking about your child and what's going to work for them in that space. And actually, is it that they want to be in and amongst everything? So how do you support them to kind of engage in all of that? But also, is it that actually you need to identify a space that they can go away to during that party? So yeah, I guess what I will say is if you have, for the parent that kind of asked this question, or if people have questions very similar to this question, feel free to get in touch with the advice line. Obviously, we're giving very general advice today, but we can obviously give more personalized advice through our advice line. Or, as I said at the beginning of the event, please pop your questions into the comments below this live video. And like I said, I am keeping an eye to see if any come in. But I guess what we'll do in the meantime is just continue to answer some of the pre-submitted questions that we've received. And I guess the next question that we've received is from another parent. And again, it's regarding her teenage daughter. Her daughter has just received a diagnosis of autism and ADHD. And, as a teenager, as most teenagers kind of feel at that time, is that they don't want to be seen as different by their peers. But what the parent is asking is, so how do they support that? But also, where do they find connections for their daughter with other autistic girls and young people? Caitlin, I guess, can you kind of expand on that? And Kirsten, please feel free to chip in as well on this.
Yeah, I think from personal experience, I'm autistic myself, and after my diagnosis, I wasn't quite ready to kind of disclose that to everyone and fully embrace it like I am now. I'm quite comfortable with it now, but especially for when we see teenagers that receive that fresh diagnosis, they're already at such a stage in life where they're not wanting to be seen as different. They want to kind of fit the molds and go with the flow and not make much noise in the little society that teenagers have together. And it's a really difficult time in life anyway, generally, and to have that diagnosis at that time can be such a struggle to come to terms with for some people and some young people, that it's just about giving that time for your daughter to come to terms with that herself before kind of trying to get her to branch out and find autistic friends and really pushing that. It might be that she needs a bit of time to process autism and what it means for her, because it is so different and individualized for us all, and it takes time to really understand that about yourself within yourself, but then to feel comfortable sharing that part of yourself with other people is such a huge step to take. And I think that will come in time, and she will do that in her own way, whatever that may be. And it might be that looking for spaces for her to kind of engage with others might not be always autism specific. It might be more interest driven, and she can find people that have common interests, and that might lead to people that have common experiences as her. It doesn't have to always be that you seek out specific autistic peer support, because if she's not in a place where she's wanting to engage with that herself within herself, she might not feel comfortable in that space yet. So is there another way that you can kind of promote that peer support from a different angle, from interests and things that she likes to do generally, instead of just looking for autism peer support at the time where she's still in that processing stage? I think it's really important to allow that space and that time after a diagnosis, and it can be a short time and some people can come to terms with it really quickly, but for others it can take a long time to understand what it means to them, and it's just about giving that space to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point that you raised, Caitlin, in terms of giving her time. I think we speak to a lot of people over the advice line, parents, autistic individuals, and actually everyone, I guess, having their own experience and their own journey following receiving a diagnosis, which can bring a lot of different emotions, a lot of different feelings. And I guess, each and every individual we speak to, that journey that they are kind of going through at that time is personal to them. And we kind of are there to obviously listen and provide whatever emotional support a person might need in that moment. And I guess I know obviously Mum's question here was specifically in relation to kind of finding connections for her daughter, and we are more than happy to get in touch with you directly to kind of find out what other opportunities might be available based on interests, or what local opportunities might be available for your daughter. But as Caitlin mentioned, it is about giving her time in terms of processing those diagnoses. But I guess that there's also possibly a bit of support available for Mum as well, who will be going through her own kind of journey following this diagnosis. And I guess the support that we can provide through Get Set for Autism, for example. And I wonder, Kirsten, whether would you be able to kind of give everyone watching a bit of an overview of what Get Set for Autism is?
Yeah, of course. So Get Set for Autism is really a post-diagnostic service, although it can be quite some time after a diagnosis that we support parents and carers. So they can come to us and we'll set up either 4 to 6 sessions, one-to-one with the family, focusing on whichever area they would like support in. So quite often it would be around school, it might be around anxiety, might be around sleep. So we would support you in each field and area that you'd be looking for. It can be done over Teams, it can be done over a telephone call, and the sessions are maybe an hour and a half each, and you can, some families space them out a bit so that they can take some time to think about some of the recommendations that we've chatted about, and maybe implement some of the things and then come back to us and then pick up from there. So it's a really well received support, especially for people straight after diagnosis who are just thinking, where do we go from here? What do we do with that now that we've got that?
Yeah, and I think as you say, Get Set for Autism is extremely personalized to the parents and carers who make contact with us. And it could well be that for this parent that's made contact, that actually part of that is exploring how they support connections, or support the process, processing of a diagnosis, or whatever it may be that Mum wants to kind of explore through those sessions. And as we say, we're relatively flexible in terms of how we deliver that support. And actually we've had a comment on the kind of video, our live stream today, from Dawn just saying that she went through Get Set for Autism and it was extremely helpful and amazing. And actually supported by one of the advisors on the live event today. So thank you, Dawn, for sharing that experience for everyone who's watching. The other kind of question that we've received as well is from another parent, and again, who may well have accessed Get Set for Autism previously, but they were saying that it's in relation to their 13-year-old autistic son who suffers from separation anxiety when he's away from mum and with the stress of going to school. Mum said he's been unable to attend second year in high school since January due to autistic burnout following his first 3 months in S1 of high school. So at this point, they're now nearly in a year off school. Mum says obviously that they've got very little support and don't really know what their next move is. What should they be doing? And I guess Mum's starting to question, does she persist with trying to get him to school, or should she just give up? And Kirsten, with your background of education, I just wonder whether there's any kind of advice or guidance that you could potentially give Mum in this instance.
Yeah, thinking about at the moment, just stepping right back and, you know, pulling off all the pressures and letting your young person know that you're pulling off the pressures as well, and giving them time to regulate and get back to some sort of sense of balance as well, because obviously they're feeling really heightened, and the more that it's talked about, the more heightened I would imagine that they'll become. So really sort of focusing on themselves and their own personal journey of autism as well might be helpful. Just, you know, as Caitlin had mentioned as well, it's a very individual journey for everybody. So thinking about himself and thinking about how they can focus on their own well-being just in that interim period. Unfortunately, we do see a lot of young people with autism finding it challenging going to school. There are so many things within a school and a school day that can be really, really complex. And for some young people, it's about having a lesser timetable, having those times out of class where they can regulate and be themselves. But it's, as I say, it's very, very individual. School have a huge role to play here as well. We would always recommend that you would go to Inquire, who work with families, and also Salvis and Mindroom, who work with families as well around education and what their rights are. There's also an organisation called My Right, My Say, which works with young people 12 to 15 about their say in education, what they would be looking for. So what is it your young person is looking for, and what could help them support them in their journey back into education again. And it might be that you have quite a long break from education, and education might look different when you go back to it again. Not everybody finishes their high school education. It can be very different for different people. You know, looking sort of moving forwards, having those tiny bits of interaction with different teachers, a teacher that they particularly like, a subject that they particularly like, having that sort of maybe building up to a sort of Teams or Zoom call with that teacher, you know, really tiny steps to go back in again, because anything too rushed is just going to set your young person back again and be off-putting. So it's about those kind of SMART targets, these sort of achievable things, and looking at the good points as well, really focusing on their strengths and what they have achieved, and even what they're achieving at home. It's really difficult as a parent to be an educator as well. So, you know, don't give yourself a hard time about that, trying to keep up the schoolwork, because that's not really your position at the moment. That's up to the school to do that, you know, to bridge that gap for you.
And I think, as you kind of said when talking there, Kirsten, we receive an awful lot of inquiries very similar to this one in terms of children and young people really struggling to kind of go along to school. And, you know, whenever I speak to parents, you know, it is about, like you say, reducing that pressure and reducing that demand. And then over time, I call it scaffolding, like building that scaffolding around that individual very slowly and gradually, by doing some of the things that you've mentioned there in terms of maybe having a Teams or Zoom call with particular teachers and building up that relationship and almost trust with those teachers. And actually thinking a bit more creatively around kind of how maybe professionals can support that education piece as well, rather than it being the requirement of physically maybe going into school to do that. But obviously I do recognize obviously that it requires the resource to be able to do that. So there are kind of the other side of the coin, shall we say, in relation to some of this. But like I said, it is about building that scaffolding around that individual slowly and gradually, but first and foremost removing that pressure and demand for that child, and focusing on things that are important to them. To I guess support their well-being in that moment in time, because actually they're probably experiencing very high levels of stress from that pressure and demand. And Caitlin, I guess, do you have anything that you want to add from your perspective in relation to this piece?
Yeah, I think also you can actually look at it in a way that you can do a lot with that time at home for a young person. Instead of traditionalized education, you could be working on different things like life skills. Could he help you with the cooking at home and learn that skill while he's got this time? Could you actually go out and about and interact with society in different ways, even if it's just going to the shops in a quieter time and getting them used to those parts of life, rather than it just being so focused on you're in school or you're not in school and there's nothing actually getting done. There's a lot of nurturing that could be done around that young person in that time that he's not in school, but it's education in a different way. Education looks so different for everyone, and education isn't always just maths and English. He could be using that time to learn lots of other skills from his mum, and I'm sure that is happening and you're not even realizing it. And it's about also seeing those little things and celebrating those skills that you're helping your child with in that time. And it might be that you're actually working on emotional regulation and being okay with the emotions that are coming with this time that isn't very nice, and reflecting on those things and working on skills in that way. There's so much that can be done with that time where a child isn't engaging until you get them back to a place in education where they want to be. You can still use that time to nurture in a different way, and I think that's really important to remind yourself of that if you're doing it already, and actually reflect on that. Or if you're not doing that and it's still in that place where actually your child just needs to sleep, or they need to do the things that they enjoy for a while to regulate again. And then after that, you could bring in those things like life skills and things like that, and celebrate those little milestones and those little wins, because to that young person from the outwards, it might seem like that was a small step they've took, but for that young person, it's a huge step, those little things. So it's always great to acknowledge them and celebrate them as a whole family unit, I think.
And I think the final thing I might add to that, Caitlin, is basically it's being kind to yourselves.
Yeah.
Child and young person, but also mum, be kind to
Yeah.
yourself. Remove that pressure for you too. And as Caitlin's kind of said there, celebrate those little wins along the way, because actually they're huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've been keeping an eye on the comments, and I guess we haven't got any other further questions that have come in at this time. So I guess what I'll say at this point is, I think that's us for the event today, for the last one for 2023. I guess if anyone hasn't had a chance to maybe ask the questions that they've wanted to ask, and would like to contact our advice line, then our fabulous marketing team, I can see, has already kind of made a comment of our opening hours. So I guess take a note of those, get in touch with us. You may well speak to any three of us on the screen or the wider team, who will be able to give you some really great advice, support, or guidance. In terms of the advice line, obviously we have spoken about the festive period today, and the advice line, as always, will be open up until the run up to Christmas. And this year we'll also be open for a short period in between Christmas and New Year, and then reopening on the 3rd of January. Our festive advice line hours will remain the same as what they normally do throughout the year, but our marketing team, I'm sure, will be kind of circulating those hours over our social media channels over the next few weeks to make sure that everyone's got that information, so you've got that to hand over the festive period. Thank you, Kirsten, Caitlin, again for joining me today and for giving some fantastic advice and guidance to the questions that we've received. And I hope everyone watching has found that helpful. And I guess I'll just finish off the event today from all of us at the Advice Line team and obviously the wider Scottish Autism. We wish you all an enjoyable festive period, whatever that may look like for yourselves, and we'll see you all in 2024.